Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Please go to the Henry Gornbein YouTube channel to see all of my episodes of Gracefully Graying, and also tell all of your friends about Gracefully Graying as we continue to grow. Today on Gracefully Graying, I'm pleased to welcome as my guest Dr. Peter Lichtenberg, the head of the Wayne State University Institute of Gerontology, as we discuss really a critical topic, and that is issues involving the correlation between early onset Alzheimer's and a reduction in wealth. Peter, welcome to Gracefully Graying.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
You started a survey, and as I said in the introduction, we're talking about early onset Alzheimer's and wealth. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you mean by Alzheimer's and how it's defined?
Sure, but let me just set the context for this, Henry. For the last decade, I've really been looking at the intersection between older adults' financial decision-making, financial exploitation, cognitive decline, and early Alzheimer's disease. And in 2019, some other researchers using national data, the Health and Retirement Survey, which is population-based, so it reflects all of us across the country, 30,000-foot level, had some startling findings. Every 2 years, people participate in this survey, and one of the questions they get a set of 10 words to remember, so it's a memory test. And they found that individuals who had a 10% loss of memory, which really would translate to about one word less over 2 years, excuse me.
Well, don't most people have memory lapses?
Well, hang on. Those people who had 10% memory loss had a corresponding 15 to 20% wealth loss.
That's huge.
It's very dramatic. It's very huge. And that prompted me to say, well, that's the 30,000-foot level. Let's go to a ground level and start a study where we can look at people who are worried about their memory or have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment and see how they're managing their finances. And is it financial mismanagement? Is it financial exploitation? Is it bad financial decision making? Is it a combination of all of the three?
So how are you setting up this project?
So at the Institute of Gerontology, and people can call me if they're interested in the study, 313-664-2633. And what we're doing is anybody who's concerned about their memory or has a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, we're working with them. We ask them a number of questions, but the big thing, the big ask that we have is they are providing us the previous 24 months of their bank statements for their primary checking account and primary credit card, so that we can actually take a look. Our goal is to create a risk system. There's really no scales out there for general use that would say, hey, this is a risk. There are things happening here that indicate high risk types of financial decision making and management.
You know, you raise an interesting issue, and that is, I've interviewed financial planners, and people as they retire, you have different stages, and one is like the go-go years where people are still going strong, they're traveling, and they spend a lot of money. Then you have the go-slow years where travel and other expenses go down, and then you have the no-go years where I think the major expenses are probably health care and just maintaining someone. So my question is, does that at all have any impact upon what you're doing? I mean, are you dealing with retired? Are you dealing with people who are still working, or is it really a cross-section?
It's cross-section.
Okay.
For our study, 60 years and older, many people who start to have significant memory problems start to restrict themselves in terms of how much they're spending, or if they're part of a couple where the couple is really working together on that, they just start to make changes because of of the memory problems. However, what I think we're going to find is that there are a number of people out there who are experiencing memory problems. They're underestimating the extent of them. They're isolated from others, so they're on this managing money alone, and there's all kinds of things that are happening.
What are some of the things that you're seeing?
One of the things that we're seeing is that people may be more vulnerable or susceptible to financial spending that others have in mind for them rather than that they have in mind themselves. So people may not be aware of how much they are spending for their adult children, for example, or for other relatives. And it may be exorbitant compared to what they used to, and that it's really impacting their own well-being as well. And people may be more vulnerable to exploitation for the same kind of reason that they really don't know how to cope with that kind of a problem and issue. And as you lose even a little bit of cognition, you kind of lose some of that confidence and ability to sort of deal with problems directly before they become huge.
You know, it's interesting, Peter. So what we're saying is that we have to be protected from family members as well as strangers.
There's no doubt. And all the national surveys really show that probably 65% of financial exploitation comes from people we know, not from strangers. And you know, both are dangerous and disturbing. But yes, there is really often a sense of financial entitlement in middle-aged children who have begun even doing a little bit of caretaking for their older parents. And that can mushroom into exploitation fairly quickly.
You know, it's like I found that one of the taboos is talking about money, and especially talking about money to your children. Though I've also been learning through Gracefully Graying that it's important to have these conversations because there has to be a plan of succession through estate planning, through perhaps financial gifting. So it's like there's a tightrope that we're talking about here where it's like our children or family members should know, and perhaps in some situations they should be taking care of things, but who do you trust?
That's exactly right. You've summarized it beautifully, and I'm so glad that you mentioned this taboo. There really is a taboo in our society about talking about money between the generations. And as you know, in our decision-making studies, we've really asked questions about how much people wish they had someone to talk to about money, how much talking about money to someone relieves their loneliness, and it surprises us. You know, we get a quarter to a third of people in the community that we're surveying telling us that A, they wish they had someone to talk to about their finances, and B, when they talk to somebody, it relieves their loneliness a bit. Because everybody's worried about finances. Everybody's worried about the hidden costs they don't know about what's right around the corner, about forms that they don't quite understand, and about making sure things are met. And yet, there is a taboo about talking about it. And the question is, how can you trust that people you talk to will not turn around and try to take advantage? My advice about that,
yes, that's an important question,
is if you have any doubts whatsoever about that trust, you need to set up another person who is someone that can, hopefully an independent person, that can review the expenses. Somebody that can watch the person that might be assisting, or that you've kind of informed about finances and asked to be involved with you. You need a third person to make sure that it hasn't gotten too tempting to
And
put
who
the
should
hand.
that be? I mean, I'm thinking of, you have professionals. We have our accountants. We have our financial planners. And sometimes it's financial planners who will take advantage of us as well as anyone else.
Yeah, so who should it be?
Yes.
It should be, it needs to be somebody who would be willing to be an independent party, someone hopefully you've had experience with, somebody that doesn't know the other party that's involved, somebody that is your advocate as the older adult. And if you're to the point where you really are not, as an older adult, able to follow what's going on with the finances, then you really need to think about who is going to be that power of attorney, or whether you need to request a conservator so that it can be more officially followed. But I think that most people, if they don't have somebody like an attorney or financial planner or an accountant in their orbit, they can kind of reach out to legal aid, the area agencies on aging, and get some recommendations for that kind of service.
Tell us about the study, and first of all, there's an interview. Tell us about the interview.
Yeah, so the interview really is two parts. The first part is measures such as susceptibility to scams, financial literacy, depression, anxiety, what kinds of bank accounts you have, so forth. And then we get the records together. And then the second interview is with me. I'll have looked at those records, so I'll have some questions about the bank accounts and the expenditure, so that I just understand everything, as well as the decision to continue managing finances even though you feel you have a memory problem or you've been diagnosed with a memory problem, and kind of what that entails. And then I'll do a little bit of cognitive testing with the individual.
Tell us a little bit about how the cognitive testing works.
Sure. So I always do a test of reading to get at the level of kind of your highest level of functioning. It's the last thing to go in any kind of dementia. I do a test of executive functioning, which really gets at kind of complex problem solving and the ability to manipulate and reason through things that are not as typical. I'll do a memory testing. I usually use a test that has about 15 words, and we repeat it 5 times, and we see the learning curve that somebody has. And I'll do a general test, the mini mental state exam, which is kind of just a broad-based screener, just to see, very brief, kind of where the person falls in that category. And then we'll do what we call financial management tests. These are hypothetical problems.
Like what?
Like bill paying, balancing up a register. Turns out with financial decision-making exploitation, numeracy becomes quite a predictor. And that is just simple math and simple abilities with numbers. People who don't have those skills tend to find themselves in more difficult situations and more likely to be exploited. So we'll do some of that as well.
Do most people balance their checkbook? I mean, is that a sign if you stop balancing your checkbook and you start losing track of, what checks you're writing?
It's a great question. I love when I can, not everybody will do this, but I love to see people's register. And I think I could probably, if I could just see everybody's register, I could probably do the study just based on that. And what I've noticed, Henry, is that especially if you can look at it over a couple of year period, you start to see the scratch outs, you start to see the voided checks, the mistakes that people make start to become increased. It's not really the balancing so much as it is the accurate recording and the ability and the proper filling out of checks that becomes kind of problematic. Some of the other things we're looking at, though, I'm working with Matt Rolling, who is the head of accounting at Wayne State University, and he is a personal finance expert. We look at a volatility of monthly spending. We're looking at how many bank fees are there for insufficient funds or other kinds of checks that didn't pass. We look at kind of the inflows and outflows and how often the outflows exceed sort of, many of the people that we've been interviewing have kind of a fixed rate of inflows per month, and so we can look at that as well. So we're starting to see some interesting variables to look at, and we hope that that will ultimately lead us to create a good scale that people can use.
What are some of the warning signals that you're seeing with regard to money coming in and going out that would trigger something to say something's not right?
Yeah, when you start to see people paying too much in certain categories. So interestingly, one of those categories that we've found both through our scam and identity theft program and through some of my early interviews has been phone bills. The cell phone bill, how many people are you paying the bill for? How many people have, even without you realizing it, signed up on your account? So the cell phone types of thing has been really interesting. Whether people are missing taxes or utility payments is, of course, a very important indicator of things
Sure.
as well.
Well, how do you deal with the issue that you mentioned earlier about relatives, where, we have a lot of families where they're still supporting children who are maybe in their 40s, 30s, and would a warning sign be when the money going out for these relatives suddenly starts increasing?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done, and I think this has been a little bit successful, is talk about, you're preparing this next generation. You're not going to live forever. None of us do. And are they going to be prepared to be independent when you're gone? If right now they can't live within their own means and they're starting to really exceed what you can handle and what you want to handle, then you're at a crisis point. And instead of seeing it just as a punitive thing, and you have to see it as you're helping teach them that they're going to have to be independent, that each of us has to be responsible for ourselves.
Well, that's one of the interesting questions that I often pose with financial people, and it's a kind of a question that each one of us has to answer. And answers we're gracefully graying and getting older is the fact that, is your goal with your net worth, your money, to have enough money so that on the day you pass away you have $10 in your checking account, or is your goal to maximize so that you're leaving a lot of money to your heirs? And so
Right. And so in these situations, so many times older adults are feeling vulnerable to the loss of affection from their heirs and their adult children. And this becomes a greater need in older age, actually, as status and other opportunities fade away, relationships become more important. And a lot of times, the older adults that we're working with, they just need that support because they've really come to equate they're trying to buy love in some ways, and we're helping teach them that loving someone contains a lot of different things. And one of the techniques that we use and we're applying here is learning how to do motivational interviewing on these situations. And motivational interviewing is really about helping somebody explore their own ambivalences about a certain decision. So whenever you start talking about financial decision making and potential exploitation by an adult child, there's an ambivalence. I want them to get something from me, but I don't want them to take advantage of me. So my motivational interviewing helps explore those and helps them get ready to make some changes.
Now, is this basically, I think we all lose a step or two mentally as we get older. Isn't that almost a given?
One of the things that happens is that there are a lot of individual variability with aging. And about 20% of people in their 70s, for example, don't lose a step. Okay, maybe they will later in their 80s, maybe in their 90s, but in their 70s they don't lose anything. You know, some people towards the end of the 70s, about 2/3 will lose some, but not a lot, not the 10%, that's for sure. And then
so 10% is a big loss.
yeah, 10% significant. And then in terms of it's over 4 trials, and so it's not a hard learning task. And so to lose 10% means, you know, you're really not operating as effectively. And then 15% of people will lose that 10% even in normal aging. That's sort of what you're talking about. So there's a lot of individual variability in this, Henry, and yes, in normal aging, people will lose some memory functioning over time, but usually very little until they're in their 80s, and then just a little bit. But what happens is losing 10% is enough that it really keeps you from keeping everything straight. You really underestimate all the bad things that might be happening to you.
Well, you said loss of 10% becomes a loss of 20% of your net worth.
Yeah, right. And
that's substantial.
And it's huge. It really is huge, and it's a question that we're trying to sort of go from the 30,000-foot finding of other researchers to ground level about, well, where are these losses on a day-to-day basis?
For viewers, let's say someone has $1 million. 20% is 200,000.
Yeah.
500,000, 20% of 100,000. So, and if it's at 2 million, you're talking about 400,000.
Yes.
So those can become very significant numbers.
Yes. So I was just working with a woman who was spending 40% of her fixed monthly income on cell phone bills, and she was carrying cell phone bills for about 5 other people. And it had sort of accumulated over the years as people kind of figured out that she was a soft touch for this. And, oh, will you help me for a little bit? And then they never backed off. So she was losing her relative wealth. And she didn't have a lot of wealth, but this is a good example of she really wasn't able to kind of comprehend how much she was losing. She just knew something was wrong.
Peter, we have less than 3 minutes. What are your goals with the survey? I know you want to show it, but where do you want this to go?
Our goals are totally about prevention with this survey. We want financial institutions, we want families, we want individuals themselves to be able to use a tool and know what their risk is, that they're on the path towards losing wealth. Number 2, I really want to raise awareness about the fact that early memory loss is a very vulnerable time. It's often invisible, and we really have to be vigilant. We can't just dismiss it. We have to take it seriously ourselves and make sure that we're trusting somebody else, if we even think we're having some memory loss, to get involved and kind of help us monitor how we're doing financially. Those are my 2 main goals.
We have less than a minute. Are there any takeaways, any signs that we should look for as we're talking to others or as we're thinking about reflecting on ourselves individually?
So we tell adult children, have this conversation, but be careful. Be gentle. Have it as a partnership. Do not try to bowl over an older adult. There's still a strong independence there. And work together and collaborate for their wellness.
It's a balancing act. And we're out of time. Dr. Peter Lichtenberg, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying. It's always a pleasure to have you. And I want to thank you for watching Gracefully Graying.